Welcome back to Mythic Codex Legends Unveiled, the place where mythology, folklore, and legends come alive. I'm your host Eliza, and tonight we'll uncover the stories that have captivated humanity for thousands of years. Turn the page, our journey begins now. Season 5 starts now. And I wanted to start this season with something different, something dark, something bloody. Something that makes you wonder whether some places become haunted because the creatures that live there, or whether the creatures are born from the terrible things that happen there. Tonight, we're heading to the borderlines between Scotland and England, a place filled with ancient castles, battles, violence, and betrayal, and stories that have survived for hundreds of years. And somewhere among those ruins, something is waiting. It is small, it is twisted, it has sharp teeth, claws, and iron boots. A red cap, but that red cap isn't red because of dye. It's red because of blood. Tonight we're talking about the creature known as the red cap, also called the bloody cap, red comb, and in some traditions, the peri. And if the legends are true, the red cap doesn't just haunt places where people died. It waits for someone else to join them. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's open the first chapter of Season 5. Because tonight, we're going into the castle. The red cap becomes from the folklore of Anglo-Scottish border, and unlike some mythical creatures that were said to protect people, guide travelers, or punish those who broke certain rules, the red cap is not here to help you. It's here to kill you. Folklore describes the red cap as a small but powerful, ugly, goblin-like creature. He often describes as a short, thick-set with long teeth, claw-like fingers, wild hair, and fairy red eyes. He wears iron boots. He carries a weapon resembling a peak. And, of course, he wears his famous red cap. But here's where the story gets disturbing. The red cap has to remain red. And how does he keep it that way? He soaks it in the blood of its victims. According to the legend, if the cap loses its color, the creature could become weak or even perish. So, image walking through an abandoned castle at night. You hear something, not footsteps, something heavier. Clang! You stop. Nothing. Then clang! Closer. You look down the hallway, and there, standing in the darkness, are two glowing eyes. You can't see the rest of him, just the eyes. Then you hear the sound again. Clang! The iron boots. And suddenly you realize something. Whatever is standing at the end of that hallway has been waiting for you. So, here's my question for you. If you were completely alone inside an abandoned castle and heard those iron boots coming towards you, would you investigate or would you run? And be honest with yourself, because I already know what I would do. I'm running. There's no way I'm letting that thing get any closer to me. I don't care how tiny it is. I don't care how small it is. I'm running. I'm getting the hell out of there. One of the creepiest parts of the Redcap legend is where these creatures are supposed to live. Ruined castles, old towers, abandoned strongholds, places where terrible things were believed to have happened. And that actually makes the legend even more interesting, because the Scottish borders have a long history of warfare and violence. Castles weren't just beautiful buildings, they were places of defense, places where people fought, people were imprisoned, people were tortured, and people died. So perhaps it's not surprising that folklore eventually filled those ruins with something equally frightening. The Redcap became associated with castles that had dark reputations. And one castle in particular became deeply connected with the legend. Hermitage Castle. Hermitage Castle stands in the Scottish border. Even today, it has an intimidating reputation. It's an old, particular ruined fortress surrounded by a landscape that feels almost made of a ghost story. But the castle's darkest legend involved a man named William de Soulis. And this is where our story gets complicated, because William de Soulis was a real historical figure. But the stories surrounding him became something much darker. Folklore portrayed him as a cruel and sinister man involved with dark magic, and according to legend, he was a supernatural servant. He had a supernatural servant, a redcap. His name was Robin Redcap. The story says Robin Redcap served William de Soulis and helped bring terror and destruction to the lands surrounding Hermitage Castle. And if you're wondering whether things could get any darker, they do. According to the legend, Robin Redcap wasn't simply hiding in the castle. He was protecting his master. The creature supposedly had supernatural abilities and could not easily be defeated by ordinary weapons. Some versions of the story describe him as living within the castle and serving as de Soulis's familiar. And this is where I want you to image something. Image being a person living near the castle hundreds of years ago. You've already heard stories about your lord. You've heard whispers about strange riddles. You've heard stories about people disappearing, and then you hear that something lives inside the castle. Something that isn't human. Something with glowing eyes. Something that wears a cap stained with blood. Would you go anywhere near that castle? Probably not. But there were people who eventually decided that enough was enough. This is one of the darkest parts of the legend. The people living under William de Soulis were supposedly so terrified of him that they eventually turned against him. And according to folklore, they captured him. Then they took him to a place known as Nineston Ridge. And this is where the legend becomes brutal. The story says William de Soulis was wrapped in lead and boiled alive. It's absolutely horrifying image. But here's something important about this legend. Historical records tell us something different. William D. Solis was imprisoned at Dumbstorn Castle and died there following his involvement in conspiracy against Robert and Bruce. So, somewhere along the way, history and folklore became tangled together. And honestly, sometimes I think that's what makes these stories even more fascinating. Because you have a real person, a real castle, real historical period, and then folklore takes those pieces and creates something monstrous. And standing beside William D. Solis in that legend is Robin Redcap. Now, let's get back to the Redcap himself, because this is the part that makes the creature so disturbing. The Redcap doesn't kill because it needs food. It kills because violence is part of what it is. The stories describe it attacking travelers who enter its territory. Sometimes the creature is said to throw stones at people. Other stories describe it attacking with its pike or claws. And if the victim dies, the Redcap takes their blood, not necessarily to drink, but to stain the cap, to keep that crimson color. Think about how horrifying that image is. A little creature standing over a dead traveler, reaching down, taking the victim's blood, and rubbing it into the cap on its head, then walking away. Clang, clang, clang! Back in the darkness, and the next person who enters the castle has no idea what is waiting for them. One thing I love about folklore is that the monsters often have rules, and the Redcap is no different. The most famous rule is the blood red cap. The creature needs blood to keep its cap crimson. And that gives us something interesting to think about. What if the Redcap isn't simply wearing a red cap? What if the hat is almost a part of the creature itself? What if the blood isn't just decoration? What if it's survival? So here's another question for you. If you discovered an ancient red cap inside an abandoned castle, and you knew the legend said the red cap needed blood to survive, would you touch it? Would you destroy it? Or would you leave it exactly where you found it? Because personally, I'm leaving it. I'm not touching the creepy bloody hat. No way. I'm good. I'm not touching that thing. Now image Hermitage Castle after sunset. The tourists, the lights, the voices. Just the wind moving through the ruins. The stones are cold. The halls are empty. And every sound echoes. You hear something behind you. You turn around. Nothing. You keep walking. Then clang! You stop. Another sound. Clang! This time it's closer. turn. Still nothing. You start walking faster. Clang, clang, clang! You look toward the end of the hallway. And there it is. A small figure. Wild hair, bright eyes, iron boots. A weapon in its hand. And a cap so dark red it almost looks black. You don't move. Neither does it. Then it smiles, and you see the teeth. That would be the moment I would realize. The stories weren't meant to scare people away from the castles. Maybe they were meant to keep people alive. Why Redcap still terrifies us. There are plenty of terrifying creatures in folklore, but what makes the Redcap different is how simple the idea is. You don't need a giant monster. You don't need wings. You don't need supernatural storms. You need an abandoned place, a little creature hiding in the shadows, and a reason for people to be afraid of the dark. The Redcap represents something older than the creature itself. Fear of violence, fear of isolated places, fear of what might be hiding inside ruins, and maybe even fear of history. Because sometimes the scariest part of a haunted place isn't the ghost. It's knowing that something terrible really happened there. Today, we can look at the Redcap and recognize it's as folklore. We can separate the historical William D. Soulis from the legendary sorcerer he became in the stories. We can visit castles. We can study old records. We can research for explanations. But folklore doesn't always disappear just because history gives us an answer. Sometimes the stories survive because people want it to. They tell it to their children. Their children tell someone else. And eventually, hundreds of years later, we're still talking about the little creature, the blood red cap. And maybe that's the real power of legends. They survive because of us. So, was the red cap real? Was something actually hiding inside the ruined castle of Scottish borders? Was Robin Redcap truly the supernatural servant of William D. Soulis? Or was the Redcap simply a story created from the darkness surrounding a violent time in history? We may never know. And honestly, I think that's what makes folklore so much fun. Because there's always a little question sitting in the back of your mind. What if? What if someone really did see something? What if someone really heard those iron boots? What if the stories were based on something people couldn't explain? And what if, somewhere inside an old ruined castle, something is still waiting? So here's my final question. If you were standing outside an abandoned castle tonight, and someone told you, don't go inside, there's something in there that wears a red cap, would you believe them? Or would you walk through those doors anyways? Let me know what you think. Because this is only the beginning. Season 5 has officially started. And if the red cap is indication of what's coming next, we're going to be going somewhere very dark. This is Mythic Codex Legends Unveiled. And remember, every legend has a story, but sometimes the story is only the beginning.